Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a decision that reverberated worldwide, the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down President Trump's sweeping tariffs, dismantling a cornerstone of his economic policy. The ruling marks a dramatic shift, ending years of trade tensions and uncertainty that have impacted global supply chains and the cost of everyday goods. For businesses and consumers, it signals relief, lower prices, and a more stable trade environment. For the Trump administration, it's a major legal and political blow, challenging the foundation of its America First strategy. This isn't just about trade law, it's about the limits of presidential power and the future of the global economic order. Tonight, we trace the origins, legal battle, and far-reaching consequences of this historic decision. To understand today's historic Supreme Court ruling, we need to rewind to April 2025, a pivotal moment that set the stage for a national debate. The country was emerging from a turbulent winter, and the political climate was tense, with economic anxieties running high across the nation. That month, President Trump made headlines by announcing the so-called Liberation Day tariffs. He invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law originally designed for national security emergencies, not sweeping trade policy. The move was bold, controversial, and caught many by surprise. By using IEEPA, the White House bypassed Congress entirely, imposing tariffs on imports from nearly every country. The stated goal was to revive American manufacturing and bring jobs back home, a promise that resonated with many workers and communities hit hard by globalization. However, the reality on the ground quickly became apparent. American companies, especially small businesses, faced skyrocketing costs for materials and parts. Supply chains that had taken decades to build were suddenly thrown into chaos, and store shelves emptied as prices soared. For everyday consumers, the impact was immediate: higher prices at the checkout and fewer choices. Retaliation from America's trading partners was swift and severe. U.S. farmers, already struggling with low commodity prices, saw their exports targeted by new foreign tariffs. Manufacturers faced canceled orders and closed factory gates as global demand for American goods plummeted. Critics from both sides of the aisle argued that using IEEPA for such broad trade measures was an unconstitutional overreach. The Constitution clearly grants Congress, not the President, the authority to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Legal scholars and lawmakers warned that this precedent could upend the balance of power between the branches of government. This fundamental question of separation of powers quickly escalated into a full-blown legal battle. Lawsuits were filed, and the issue raced through the lower courts, eventually landing at the steps of the Supreme Court. With the nation watching closely, the stage was set for a constitutional showdown that would test the limits of presidential power and redefine the future of American trade policy. Lawsuits against the tariffs began almost immediately, as soon as the new policies were announced. Across the country, a wave of legal challenges was set in motion, with business owners, trade associations, and advocacy groups all scrambling to respond. The stakes were high, and the sense of urgency was palpable. Business groups argued passionately that President Trump had overstepped his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. They claimed the law was never intended to be used as a tool for broad trade policy, and that such sweeping actions should be left to Congress, not the executive branch. Their legal teams worked around the clock, preparing arguments and gathering evidence. In the first round of court battles, lower courts sided with the challengers. Judges ruled that the president's use of emergency powers to impose tariffs was unconstitutional, setting a major precedent. The decision sent shockwaves through Washington, raising questions about the limits of presidential power. Despite these rulings, the tariffs remained in effect as the administration quickly appealed. This created months of costly uncertainty for importers, manufacturers, and small businesses across the nation. Many companies faced difficult choices, whether to absorb the extra costs, pass them on to consumers, or cut jobs. The economic impact rippled through supply chains and communities. The case, now known as American Importers Alliance versus United States, rapidly became the year's most closely watched legal battle. Reporters camped outside courthouses, and the public followed every twist and turn, aware that the outcome could reshape the nation's approach to trade and executive authority. Eventually, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, zeroing in on a fundamental constitutional question. Where does presidential emergency power end and Congress's authority begin? The justices prepared to weigh arguments that could redefine the balance of power in Washington for generations. Legal scholars and constitutional experts called it a defining moment for the separation of powers in the 21st century. Debates erupted in law schools and think tanks, with many arguing that the outcome would set a precedent for how future presidents could wield emergency powers. The stakes were enormous: trillions of dollars in global trade, the livelihoods of countless Americans, and the very balance of American democracy hung in the balance as the nation awaited the Supreme Court's decision. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration's use of IEPA for sweeping tariffs unconstitutional. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, emphasized that while the president can act in emergencies, he cannot use such powers to bypass Congress for long-term economic policy. The court reaffirmed that the power to tax and regulate trade rests with Congress. The dissent argued the president needs broad discretion in national security, but the majority held firm. The immediate result: the tariffs are illegal, collection stops, and importers can seek refunds for billions paid. The Treasury now faces the daunting task of processing claims and managing the fiscal fallout. The Supreme Court's decision sparked instant optimism in global markets. Stocks surged, and business leaders celebrated. International leaders welcomed the ruling as a victory for the rule of law and global stability. The White House, however, responded with defiance, vowing to continue fighting for fair trade by other means. For American importers, the nightmare of extra duties is over, and the focus shifts to reclaiming billions in refunds. Legal experts expect a flood of claims, but the prospect of recovered funds is a lifeline for struggling businesses. The decision injects a massive stimulus into the economy, offering hope for investment, hiring, and lower prices. The trade war's end brings relief, but the political battle over trade policy is far from over. The economic impact will be felt everywhere, from Wall Street to small-town shops. Companies relying on imports see immediate cost relief, likely leading to lower prices for consumers. The Treasury loses a major revenue stream and now faces billions in refund obligations, raising tough questions for Congress. Small businesses, hit hardest by tariffs, can now compete and grow, while farmers hope for renewed export markets. However, industries once protected by tariffs, like steel, now face renewed foreign competition. Policymakers must manage this transition, supporting affected workers while embracing the broader benefits of open trade. The ruling doesn't solve all economic woes, but it shifts the U.S. toward global integration. The Supreme Court's decision is a political earthquake for President Trump, sending shockwaves through Washington and across the nation. The ruling not only challenges the core of his administration's policies, but also signals a dramatic shift in the balance of power between the executive and judicial branches. It strikes at the heart of his America First agenda, undermining the very message that energized his supporters and defined his presidency. The decision calls into question the future of his signature policies, and leaves his administration scrambling to respond. The ruling weakens the administration's image of strength and control, casting doubt on its ability to deliver on campaign promises. Political analysts are quick to point out that this moment could mark a turning point in Trump's presidency, as he faces mounting legal and political challenges. The court's decision hands a significant victory to critics who have long argued that the tariffs were reckless and unconstitutional, fueling protests and heated debates across the country. It intensifies the ongoing debate over presidential power, raising fundamental questions about the limits of executive authority and the role of Congress in checking the president's actions. Lawmakers from both parties are now forced to confront these issues head-on. As the court prepares to hear more cases challenging executive authority, the nation watches closely, aware that the outcomes could reshape the presidency for years to come. For the upcoming midterms, Democrats will seize on the ruling to argue for stability, accountability, and a renewed commitment to the rule of law. They see an opportunity to rally voters who are concerned about unchecked presidential power. Meanwhile, Republicans face a divided path torn between defending the president and addressing growing concerns within their own ranks about the direction of the party and the future of conservative principles. The decision also puts the Supreme Court's legitimacy under intense scrutiny, as public trust in the institution is tested by accusations of partisanship and judicial overreach. Every major ruling is now viewed through a sharply partisan lens. Supporters of the decision see it as an example of judicial activism and a necessary check on executive power, while opponents argue it is a vital defense of the Constitution and the separation of powers, essential to preserving American democracy. In the midst of this turmoil, Chief Justice Roberts continues to navigate a deeply polarized era, striving to maintain the court's integrity and guide it through one of the most contentious periods in modern American history. Experts agree. This ruling is a landmark check on executive power, reaffirming that emergencies can't be used to bypass Congress. Economists say the decision will boost growth and tame inflation, but warn that other protectionist tools remain. Internationally, the ruling helps restore America's credibility and predictability with allies. Yet, the political appetite for protectionism endures, and the debate over trade, jobs, and globalization is far from settled. Analysts caution that new forms of economic nationalism may emerge, keeping tensions alive. The administration faces pressure to show it's still fighting for American workers. The path forward will require careful policy, not just legal victories. October 6, 2025 will be remembered as the day the Supreme Court reasserted its role as a check on executive power and reset the global economic order. The ruling ends a costly era of tariffs, lowers prices, and returns billions to American businesses. More importantly, it reaffirms that Congress, not the president, controls trade policy. The decision offers a chance to rebuild trust and cooperation internationally, but the underlying anxieties about globalization remain. Leaders must now address these concerns through negotiation and thoughtful policy, not unilateral action. The story of the tariffs is a lesson in the balance of power and the importance of global partnership. The Supreme Court has closed one door on economic nationalism, opening another to renewed engagement. The world is watching.